This is my safe space, so I'm going to talk about a situation that I had with a patient. He came in with a printed spreadsheet, 43 supplements, three different peptide protocols, a cold plunge, red light therapy, and a hyperbaric oxygen schedule. He had spent roughly $2,400 a month on what he calls his longevity stack. He was 49. His VO2 max was in the bottom quartile for his age. He hadn't done resistance training in 2 years. His sleep averaged 5 hours and 40 minutes. His fasting insulin was elevated. I told him we can talk about the supplements, but first I need to show you that the foundation underneath them isn't there yet. He looked at me like I insulted his spreadsheet. My bad. I did not mean to. And that conversation is what this video was about. I want to be direct about why I'm framing this the way that I am. The longevity space has a specific evidence problem. A finding emerges often from animal models or from a small underpowered human trial, sometimes from compelling mechanistic work, and it travels from research paper to podcast to supplement labels at a speed that the evidence does not support. I am not against any specific intervention categorically. Rapamycin, NAD, precursors, metformin for healthy people. These all have interesting data. I follow that research. Some of it will likely prove out, but the human randomized controlled trial evidence for most of them does not currently justify the certainty for which they're being recommended to people who haven't yet optimized the 5 pillars I'm going to walk you through. I'm Theo Jones. I'm a board certified family nurse practitioner and the founder of Weekend White Coat in Baltimore. I work with high performing founders and executives on exactly this kind of comprehensive health strategy. Let me show you what the evidence actually supports. Okay, pillar one, let's break it down. The single most well-supported longevity intervention in all of human research is cardiovascular fitness, specifically VO2 max. A landmark study in JAMA followed over 120,000 patients and found that low cardiorespiratory fitness was the strongest predictor of all-cause mortality, stronger than smoking, hypertension, diabetes, or any other measured variable. Moving from the lowest fitness quintile to the next quintile above it reduced mortality risk by approximately 50%. The relationship is dose dependent with no observed ceiling. For context, the mortality risk reduction from moving from low to moderate fitness is larger than the effective size of most medications we prescribe. VO2 max is trainable. Zone 2 training, which is sustained moderate intensity aerobic work where you can hold a conversation, but it is effortful, let's break down pillar two, is a longevity organ. I say that not for effect. It is literally true. In the current research, skeletal muscle is the largest site of glucose disposal in the body. Its function determines insulin sensitivity more than any other single tissue. It secretes myokines, the anti-inflammatory signaling molecules that protect brain tissue, support immune function, and reduce systemic inflammation. Grip strength, a proxy for skeletal muscle function, is one of the most consistent predictors of mortality in longitudinal research. Stronger people live longer. It's not a correlation. Sarcopenia, the age-related loss of muscle mass and function, begins in the 30s. Without intervention, we lose 3 to 5% of our muscle mass per decade, accelerating significantly after 50. Sarcopenia is independently associated with cardiovascular disease, metabolic disease, cognitive decline, and mortality. The intervention is resistance training, 2 to 3 sessions per week targeting all major muscle groups. Progressive overload, meaning the stimulus increases over time, is what drives adaptation. Protein intake is the other essential variable, 1.2 to 1.6 grams per kilogram of body weight distributed across meals to maximize muscle protein synthesis. For older adults, and I'm specifically talking about people in their 50s and 60s, the evidence for the importance of resistance training is preserving function, metabolic health, and cognitive outcomes is among the strongest in geriatric medicine. Okay, let's dive into this third pillar. Insulin resistance is a longevity accelerant. I want to be specific about that framing. Insulin resistance is the progressive inability for the cells to respond appropriately to insulin signaling. It underlines or accelerates virtually every chronic disease associated with premature mortality. So type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, certain cancers, or Alzheimer's disease, which is now increasingly being described as the type 3 diabetes in current research due to the central role of insulin signaling and neurological function. Fasting insulin is the earliest detectable marker of insulin resistance. It elevates years before fasting glucose or hemoglobin A1C. Fasting insulin above 7 to 10 micronutrients per milliliter in the context of a clinical assessment, it warrants attention. Yet, it's the most absent from most annual panels. The interventions with the strongest evidence for improving insulin sensitivity includes resistance training, the same stimulus as Pillar 2, dietary reduction of refined carbohydrates and ultra processed foods, adequate sleep, reduction of visceral adiposity, and for approximate candidates, GLP-1 medications or lifestyle modifications is insufficient. Body composition assessments, not just BMI, but the ratio of lean mass to fat mass and the location of fat distribution tells a more complete metabolic story than weight alone. Visceral fat, which accumulates around the abdominal organs, is metabolically active in a way that subcutaneous fat is not. A DEXA or an in-body assessment gives you the actual numbers. I run these at every intake for my members. Let's break down Pillar 4, your sleep architecture. Sleep is not a recovery tool. It is a biological maintenance process that cannot be replicated by any other means, and its disruption has direct longevity consequences. During slow wave sleep, your deepest stage, the glymphatic system is most active. This is the brain's waste collection clearance mechanism. Cerebrospinal fluid circulates through the interstitial space, washing out metabolic byproducts including amyloid beta, the protein that accumulates in Alzheimer's disease. Chronic sleep deprivation impairs glymphatic clearance. The amyloid accumulation that characterizes Alzheimer's pathology has been shown in research to accelerate with disrupted sleep, years before any cognitive symptoms appear. Sleep deprivation also accelerates telomere shortening, the biological marker of cellular aging. Women who sleep 6 hours or less have measurably shorter telomeres than those sleeping 7, even after controlling other variables. Women who sleep 6 hours or less have measurably shorter telomeres than those sleeping 7 to 8 hours, even after controlling for other variables. The longevity protocol that doesn't anchor itself to 7 to 9 hours of high quality sleep is working against itself. Every other intervention, training, nutrition, supplementation, it produces a fraction of its intended effect in the context of chronic sleep deprivation. What disrupts sleep architecture in this population the most? Alcohol, especially before bed. Elevated evening cortisol, sleep apnea, blue light exposure, and inconsistent sleep timing. Each of these has a specific intervention. I run a sleep assessment at intake for every member and treat sleep as a clinical variable, not just a lifestyle suggestion. Finally, we're at Pillar 5, stress physiology. Stress is not a mindset problem. It is a physiological state with measurable biological consequences. Chronic elevation of cortisol, the primary stress hormone, produces a cascade of longevity-relevant effects. Visceral fat accumulation, insulin resistance, immune dysregulation, hippocampal atrophy, and accelerated telomere shortening. The research on chronic physiological stress and biological aging is now substantial and consistent. Caregivers of chronically ill family members, people in high demand, individuals with high perceived stress all show accelerated biological aging markers compared to matched controls. For founders specifically, the relevant pattern isn't acute stress. It's sustained background load of insufficient recovery. The HPA axis, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal system that governs the stress response, was designed for episodic activation and recovery. What founders experience is often continuous low to moderate activation without the recovery intervals the system requires. Over years, this produces HPA dysregulation, a disrupted cortisol pattern that is itself a health risk and independent of what it caused. Over years, this produced HPA dysregulation, a disrupted cortisol pattern that is itself a health risk independent of what caused it. The 4-point salivary cortisol test maps the actual pattern. The interventions that address it are specific to the pattern. A flat morning cortisol requires different interventions than elevated evening cortisol. This is why I don't prescribe generic stress management. I prescribe protocol-specific intervention based on what the cortisol pattern actually shows. Now, let me walk you through what a weekend white coat longevity intake actually looks like, because I think it illustrates how these 5 pillars translate into clinical practice. At intake, every member gets a comprehensive lab panel. The standard metabolic, lipid, and inflammatory markers, plus apolipoprotein B, lipoprotein A, fasting insulin, full thyroid panel, full hormonal panel, ferritin, and a cortisol assessment. We run a VO2 max check and a body composition measurement. We take a thorough history, including sleep patterns, training history, stress load, and nutritional baseline. From that data, we build a personalized protocol, not a generic longevity stack, a protocol specific to what that person's labs and assessment actually shows. If VO2 max is the limiting factor, the training prescription reflects that. If insulin resistance is the dominant risk, the metabolic intervention comes first. If sleep architecture is disrupted, we address that before we talk about anything else. Because everything else works better when sleep is right. We reassess annually. Longevity isn't a destination, it's a trajectory. The goal is not to optimize once, it is to maintain a trajectory of improving or stable biomarkers over decades. Now, I said at the beginning we come back to the supplements, and here is my honest position. The supplements with the strongest evidence in the longevity context, not animal models, actual human data, are a shorter list than most people want. Vitamin D in deficient individuals has consistent evidence for mortality outcomes. Omega-3 fatty acids have a cardiovascular data that's meaningful at appropriate doses. Creatine has emerging data beyond athletic performance, cognitive and muscle preservation benefits in older adults that I find genuinely interesting. Magnesium glycinate has a clinical role in sleep architecture and stress physiology. For everything else, NAD precursors, rapamycin, senolytics, the data is interesting and I follow it closely. Some of these will likely prove meaningful in humans. None of them currently have the trial evidence that will put them above the 5 pillars I've described. They're potential additions to a working foundation, but they're not the foundation. The patient with the $2,400 supplement stack, we restructured his protocol. Zone 2 training 4 times a week, progressive resistance training twice a week, protein targets established, sleep treated as a clinical priority, cortisol patterns assessed and addressed. 4 months later, his VO2 max had improved meaningfully. His fasting insulin had normalized. His sleep duration was up. He still takes some supplements. He now understands what they're sitting on top of. That's the whole point. Weekend White Coat is where the kind of comprehensive evidence anchored work happens. If you're building for the long game, the link is in the bio.